It's something that we all have to deal with. Every person who is listening to this podcast, you do have to deal with conflict. You have to deal with confrontation. There is a right way to do that. There is a wrong way to do that. Welcome to the Step Up Podcast, where our goal is to help you step up as a man in every area of your life. I'm your host, Dave Kinney, and I'm joined by my pastor, Pastor Chris Kouba. Okay, PC, so what I want to talk about today is a topic that every single person who listens to this podcast is going to have to deal with, and that is leading through conflict, how to handle confrontation, the idea of how you manage conflict resolution. And I thought instead of jumping right into like how you handle that with your marriage or parenting or in the workplace, we'll get to those things. I know you coach your kids in sports. I coach my kids in sports. So what is your best story as a dad coach when you've had to confront the umpire, a ref, the opposing team's coach, something like that? Because every good dad coach has a story about that.
I do. I have gotten 2 technical fouls coaching basketball. Okay, to be clear, neither one of them were totally should have been technical fouls. The first one
let's check
happened,
the tape on that.
The first one happened because we came out of halftime and I had 6 players on the floor and didn't realize it, and that's apparently an automatic tech. So that's not
weak,
that bad.
no problem.
Yeah, no, whatever. It was like whatever. But it was a little bit like, I can't believe I just got a technical foul. The second one, I might have earned. All right. So basically we were playing, it's kind of a funny thing. It was a Sunday game. So I actually had preached that morning. It was a great services here at United City. Things were awesome. It was incredible. We had a lot of decisions. It was like really kind of an epic morning. And then I immediately left from there and we went to go to the basketball game. And it was like in a really large gym, but very few people actually there at the game.
A lot of echo power.
Very much so. Like
Dangerous.
Everyone could hear everything at any time, right? And not a lot of cheering. So like it was like anything you possibly said, it was very, very loud. So I actually was an assistant coach. I was not the head coach. And our main player, we were not a great team, and we only had one really good player. And our main player got whistled for 3 early fouls in the first half. So we kind of told him, you cannot get another foul. Like we got no shot whatsoever if you get a foul. He gets in there 2 minutes into the third quarter, and he gets whistled for a very ticky-tack, not a real should be the case, foul for his 4th foul. And I said something to the ref. I don't even remember what I said, and it wasn't necessarily bad. The problem was when I said it, happened to be at a time when no one else said anything else in the entire gym.
There was a lull in the gym.
So it was so loud and it was so obnoxious, not because of what I said, but just because of the fact that it was nothing else drowning it out. And he immediately gave the head coach, who's actually a member of our church here, a technical foul on behalf of me and told me that I was not allowed to get up anymore the rest of the game. And if I said one word, I was going to get kicked out of the gym. So there you go.
That's so great.
It was. How about you?
That's where I get lucky. I get lucky because we do baseball, so it's outside, so sound does not travel near as much. There have been several times, though, where we'll get done with the game, and Emily and I will get in the car, and I'll be like, hey, from where you were sitting, could you hear the conversation? I call it a conversation. Yeah. It was a one-way conversation I was having with the umpire. And most of the time she's like, no, I couldn't hear a thing, which is a, praise God. But of course that happens. Constantly. They make terrible calls, and you got to take up for your team. You know, you got to deal with it. And so I've luckily never been tossed. Okay. It's been threatened a few times.
Okay, wow.
So I'm kind of proud. I'm like towing that line pretty good.
How close do you think you got?
I think if I wouldn't have walked away in one situation, I would have been tossed for maybe that game and future games. But it was because of a terrible call and a horrible situation and all that kind of stuff. Again, obviously this is not your fault or my fault. Yep. This is poor referees and umpires, that we had to confront. We had to deal with them.
Okay, this is a funny part of that story, though, to finish it off. So not only did I get a technical foul that afternoon after having an amazing Sunday morning, that night we ordained like 7 new deacons at the church. Dude. So it was like one of those moments where it was like, this is Such a big contrast
Yeah,
of the day.
telling people they got to walk in holiness. And
And then here I am. I think I even had a UC hat on when I got the technical foul.
that's the worst. That's the worst.
You know, it's fine. It's
But
fine.
it's something that we all have to deal with.
No question.
Every person who is listening to this podcast, you do have to
Yep.
deal with conflict. You have to deal with confrontation.
Yep.
There is a right way to do that.
Yep.
There is a wrong way to do that. So why don't we walk through a couple of the ways that you can do that coming from a healthy place,
Yep.
and even some kind of practical wisdom that we can give to our listeners about dealing with confrontation.
Well, and this is something I think we've been talking a little bit about and stewing on a lot more, because we just got through here at United City with a leadership series, and it's kind of one of those things that in the midst of doing a leadership series, I think what I realized, not only does the Bible speak, we know that to be the case, but like I felt like I was living it.
Right.
And in the midst of this, we talked about the book of Nehemiah specifically. There was 2 weeks just on the topic of conflict, and that was by far the one we probably got the most either clarifying questions or most like, hey, how does this work? Or what does this look like in this setting and things like that. And there was just also so much practical wisdom that at the end of the day, even if you know it with conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to do, right? I mean, in some sense, the whole podcast is called Step Up. You got to just kind of do it. You got to be willing to know, like, it's coming, like it's absolutely going to be coming your way. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you can't go around it. You can't, skip it. You can't avoid it. You may try to, but eventually it's just going to make it more difficult. But you are going to have to go into to deal with it. So,
well, I think there's 2 types of people also. I think there are people that kind of run toward conflict, run toward confrontation, and then those that completely run away from it. They try and sweep everything under the rug and make sure that it never gets talked about, and it's just kind of a forgotten situation. The problem with that is it's never forgotten.
No question.
It's always any confrontation or conflict that is neglected only builds.
Yep.
Like it is stewing, it is brewing something much more. But I also think that there's some really practical wisdom for those who may be listening who say, I'm actually really good at conflict. I like confronting people and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's some wisdom in that too of at times that may not be the best quality about you. So why don't you dive into a couple of the key things that we can practice and apply when dealing with conflict?
Because the goal would be whichever one of those, something's going to be applicable for you, whether you avoid it or whether you seek it. Or whether you're just somewhere in the middle, you're going to have some help on it. The first thing I tell you is this: number one way to deal with conflict, take a step back. There's a passage in Nehemiah where it says that Nehemiah, whenever he was enraged and upset, whenever he found out what was going on, it says that he took counsel with himself, is what it says. Basically, it's this idea that he take a deep breath, wait a second. Because how many people do we know, and how many situations have we personally dealt with? I'm happy to share one myself here in just a second, but where basically you hear about something, you start to get frustrated about something, you start to get angry with something, you start to get all worked up, you start to get all tense. And if you're a conflict avoider, then you just retreat. Right. But if you're a conflict seeker, then you're just thinking, man, I need to go and just rip somebody's head off.
Attack.
I want to go make sure to do this. You pull out your phone, you pull out your computer, you start typing up that email, you do this, you did this, you did not do this, you start going on and on. And by the way, this is a pattern. You also did, and you start going historical, and you start going to more and more things. And you got this really long, passionate, angry email, and you do the big mistake of all, which is you click send. Mm-hmm. Or you click that little button there where the text message and you actually send it, only to discover 30 minutes, an hour, 2 to 3 hours later that all the information that you had, that you based that email that you just blasted, whoever it is that you blasted it to, who, by the way, they sent it to their spouse, they sent it to the people in the office, they sent it to other folks. So like now everybody's seen it, wasn't actually true. Yeah. I had a situation a couple years ago with this exact situation where somebody was telling me about some HR deal, and I can't remember what the details of a situation. That's what's crazy about it. I don't even remember what it was. And I just remember being frustrated and just, why are we still doing it this way? Why do we still have these policies in place? Or why do we still have whatever? And so, man, I did. I did the exact thing I just told you not to do. I did not take a step back. I got an email. I fired this thing off. It got sent around to some folks at the office, and then they began to start asking questions. And then I was informed about 2 hours later, hey, I think you may have even been the one that called me and was like, did you send an email this morning? Which usually if I get that call from you, it's like, oh, geez, what did I just do? Which I'm grateful that you're in my life to be able to do that, by the way. But it was one of those types of situations because I got asked about this, whatever, and that's actually not true. And then I'm telling you what happened was basically I had to spend the entire afternoon meeting individually with these people to apologize for what I had just done. I'd ruined their day. I'd wasted all of my day. I'd ruined my day. And it all because I didn't just take a step back and sit on it.
Yeah.
Sit on it just for a little bit. Have you ever done anything like that?
Of course. I mean, when you say that, the first thing that comes to my mind would be with my wife or my kids.
Sure.
Something comes up and you just pop off.
Yep.
And instead of taking a minute and taking counsel with yourself, collecting your own thoughts, and instead of reacting, the wisdom of responding, like with wisdom and care. I mean, I think about that with my relationship with Emily, where there have been so many times where I will just in the moment react to something, and it won't be 30 minutes later to where I'll get more information or accurate information or really kind of discover what the actual issue is, and then I'll feel like an idiot. And really what I feel sometimes is there's another response that happens after that. You double down.
Sure. Yep. It's a good point. Yep.
Or you cling to like humility and just you have the ability to say, I was wrong about this. And let me just be really clear for you and for myself and all of our listeners, that is really, really hard to do.
No question.
Like when you react like that, to select then like, okay, I was wrong. I was in the wrong and I need to go apologize for it. That's a difficult thing to do, but it is such a necessary thing for you to do whenever you have mishandled conflict.
Take a step back is not only initially, but it's also after you've screwed up.
Right.
Let's go back to the whole technical foul thing. I doubled down in that moment big time. You know, I'm like, I'm keeping him whatever else. That was a dumb move, right? Because then it just made the whole rest of the thing tense or whatever else. I think to your point, whenever you do realize that was one thing in that moment there, when I realized I'd messed up and sent the email, I had to kind of like, okay, what do I need to do to handle this and fix this and go take that humility. But man, it just meant eating a lot of humble pie. And it meant eating like, I messed up, I'm sorry, I made this mistake and all of that. It's just telling you how much better your life would be if whenever you get riled up about something, you would just give it an hour, give it a day, sleep on it, take a step back, take counsel with yourself. What I found is that if there's still an issue that I need to address, and I've taken a little step back, then I feel like I'm able to do it maybe dealing with the issue and not with the
symptom
anger
of the
and the
issue.
Frustration and the whatever. I'm not going historical and bringing up all this other stuff that at the end of the day has no bearing on the actual thing that took place. And there could be a lot going on in their lives at the end of the day that I just need to like take a step back, be careful, give it 12 hours, 6 hours, whatever it may be, 24 hours, and wait.
What are some of the proverbs that we talked about this one in the last couple of weeks, but there's one translation that says, a gentle answer turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:1. And then there's another.
A harsh word stirs up anger.
A harsh word stirs up anger.
How often do we use harsh words when we're just mad because we didn't just like take a deep breath? Like it's okay. Like the problem didn't get here overnight. You're not going to fix it overnight. And your yelling or your anger or your frustration or your withdrawal, because I think both are the same methods.
Agree.
You're either being loud, sending a quick email, or you just ice them. It's the same thing. Either way are bad. Take a step back, take a deep breath, and then figure out how to go with it. Let me give you another one though. Proverbs 10:19. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. You've heard it said before, say it, forget it, write it, regret it. We talked about somebody this past week, a staff member, that we, the typical reply all email, somebody's upset about something, and so all of a sudden they copy the world. And I didn't get to him fast enough, and I got onto him. I was like, what are you doing? He replied all to the email. That's not how you handle it. Even if you take a step back, that's not how you deal with it, but instead you go and because that's just never going to be beneficial. It's never going to be helpful. I think what I found though in this whole deal see if you can address this because you mentioned a home situation. I found that at times I do this better at the office than I do at home.
Sure.
And I feel like I know of some guys who maybe are more, I don't know if polished is the right word, or they're more civil at the office, or they whatever, and then they kind of just like walk in the doors of their house and are quick-tempered and are just quick to react and just, they don't take a step back. And I think it's important to think through this, men, is that this isn't just when people are going to see you thing, because your kids and your wife see you.
Right.
So they're going to learn how they respond to conflict based upon how they're seeing it modeled to them by you. And so do you need to implement some taking a step back when you walk in the doors? I mean, for me, I've literally driven around my neighborhood until I'm just kind of like calm down, decompress a little bit before I walk in the door. Because I know, especially whenever I had little kids and all that kind of stage, I'm kind of walking into chaos.
Sure.
And I don't just want to start going out upset about stuff. Or I will mentally think through in the car, okay, what I'm about to walk into, how to get ready. So that I'm kind of taking that step back ahead of time so that when I cross that threshold, I'm not just barking out orders immediately. And I just think there's so many men who, I don't know, maybe are different.
Yeah.
Between the two.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just be vulnerable for the podcast. That is something I struggle with.
Yeah.
Because, I think the tendency is to give excuses, right?
Sure.
And if you go to work all day and you're kind of dealing with people, and especially if you are in a leadership role, which all of our listeners are, where they're influencing other people and kind of managing them and all of the things that come with that territory, then you feel like once it's time to be done working, you kind of want to drop that guard and you don't have to deal with conflict anymore. But if you are a listener to this podcast and you have not had to deal with conflict in your own family, I would love to hear from you because you are the one and only.
Right. We need to interview you.
And that's if I'm just being honest, that is the most important place to deal with conflicts with health is at home, protecting your home of those things.
James 1:19-20, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. I'm convinced that the way that you're slow to anger is because you were quick to hear what's going on here and you were slow to speak. Yet most of the time when it deals with conflict poorly, it's because they are quick to speak, don't want to listen, or the vice versa is they go and they are withdrawal. They don't say anything, but in some sense they're icing while they're not technically speaking.
Exactly.
That's exactly, they're saying a whole lot by what they're not doing, right? So that's the first thing I'd say is just take a step back, okay? That's number one. Number two is I would tell you have tough conversations. The way that you're going to lead through conflict is you're going to have to eventually go there. You're going to have to eventually address the issue. You may put it off, you may avoid it, you may, you got an underperforming employee and you just basically think, man, if I just kind of wait long enough, it'll get better, and maybe you should wait a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're eventually going to have to address it. Or if you have a situation with your family, a situation with your spouse, I've just found that time just calcifies and makes things more hard. It doesn't necessarily make things easier. It doesn't mean I want to just deal with things immediately. Again, that goes back to the first step. But eventually, I'm going to have to deal with things as they come up. Men, you are not God's gift to call out everything around you. That's important for you to hear. But what happens is passivity wins the day the majority of the time. I just see too many men that allow things to take place in their homes or allow things to take place in their marriages or their parenting that it's just lazy. And I can't imagine it's that they don't think there's something wrong with it. I just think they're like, man, I just don't want to have to deal with it.
Right.
Like, I don't want to have to go there. I don't want to have to do something with it. And I think you get what you tolerate, and there's way too many men who tolerate way too much.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't mean I'm going on a tirade, but like, I'm the defender of my house.
Yeah.
It's almost like if somebody was to break in, I'm not going to tell Hillary, hey, can you go check on that?
Right.
But I think if you think about digitally, I think if you think about what's coming in terms of just the influences and whatever else, I think a lot of men are basically kind of saying, hey, you got the kids, right? Or, hey, you got the house. And it's like, wait a second here. Like, are you on it?
Yeah.
Like, are you involved? Are you having the tough conversations? Are you trying to figure out what it looks like from a parenting standpoint to be able to kind of like push and go there and ask some difficult questions? We're in a season right now with our kids. I've got 3 in high school, so we're asking a lot of questions about where they're going, what they're doing. They got proms and got homecomings and all these types of things coming up. I'm amazed at how many parents aren't asking anything.
Yeah. Because do you think it's because they're afraid of the confrontation that it may lead to with, well, where are you going? Why are you doing that? Is that a good choice? And it kind of could lead way to having a conflict with their kid, and they're trying to avoid that?
Sure, and you don't want to have an awkward conversation with another parent or whatever else.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, who's leading here?
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to it. You're not going to like seek conflict. That's not the goal. But you do have to be willing to actually go there and to deal with stuff. So let's talk through that. Let's use that as an example. We kind of mentioned here. What's some ways to go about doing this? One, I think schedule it. I found that to be the case. So, hey Hillary, I need to talk to you about something. I need to give you a heads up. This is what it's going to be about. Can we get together at this particular time and we talk through it? I found that's a lot better than springing something on her at 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just seems
especially because you have been asleep for 3 hours by 10:30 at night. So
fair enough. Same thing with an employee. Let's say, schedule it. Hey, guy, I have something to talk to you about. I need to deal with this. I need to address this. That way, they kind of know what's coming or whatever else. You're not trying to instill fear or whatever else. But I do think it's just better than blindsiding somebody. I think they're going to be able to have a place to receive it. All of that. I think second thing I'd tell you is to write it out. Okay, what I mean by that is that I have found that a lot of times I can get past the initial surfacey stuff when I write something out, what I think I'm going to say, or bullet it out, a conversation, particularly a really tough conversation with somebody, or I've had a tough conversation with a family member once, I remember, and I literally wrote a lot of it out. And what it did is it took a lot of the emotion out of it, so that I was able to actually address the particular things that were the issue of conflict, as opposed to just me talking about how hurt that I was. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think the point being is that you kind of get in those, maybe you avoid conflict because whenever you get into it, you feel like you just basically don't have clear
it
thoughts.
Goes haywire once you are in the conflict. But writing it out, it really gives you the ability to stay focused in what the conversation is actually meant to be about. And I think there's a myth about conflict, okay? I think a lot of people, and they may even be listening to this, and they have the thought, well, some people are just better at dealing with conflict than other people.
Right, yep.
Sure, that may be the case. But at the end of the day, you're going to get better and better at it the more that you do it.
No question.
Like reps are good.
Yep.
And second of all, I don't think anyone is just born with the natural knack for dealing with people and dealing with hard conversations and conflict resolution and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if you avoid it, if you run away from conflict, then you're really not going to be helpful because that conflict just continues to exist and really compounds on itself.
Yeah.
So I think these hacks, the scheduling it, writing it down, I think that it hopefully will give some people freedom of like, it's not about if you're naturally good at handling hard conversations. It's about making sure that you are doing the work to progress in dealing with conflict.
Well, I've also found scheduling it forces you to have it. My wife would tell you that I'm really good at conflict. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but what I've also found is that if I schedule it and know I have to do it, then I also, even though I may be, quote, good at it, don't avoid it because I don't like it even if I'm good at it. I don't really enjoy it, right? But if I know, hey, I got to have this check-in, I got to have this conversation, I got to have this, or I remember I have a situation with one of my kids, and I said, hey, I need to have a family meeting. Well, they kind of know what that means. I kind of know what that means. But it also just sort of like, we're going to have it on Sunday night at this time or whatever. And otherwise, I would have probably made up an excuse in the moment just to not deal with it again and not address it. And sometimes things need to be dealt with. Here's another thing, though, I tell you is key. You got to pray through it. Mm-hmm. That's not trite. I'm not just saying that. You literally, though, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've prayed headed up. I've fasted before heading into sort of particularly difficult conflict situations and particularly difficult things, just asking, because I know at the end of the day, even if words are going to sting and hurt because maybe you're having to address character issues or maybe you're having to address or let somebody go. We've had situations where we've had to do that before and it's just gut-wrenching. God has a way of letting them hear it in a different way than your greatest fear of how it's going to go that keeps you from doing it in the first place. And so at the end of the day, God's working in your life and he's working in theirs. So pray through it. Pray that God would kind of do and move and work in the midst of it.
That's kind of what I was going to ask you is this may be actually the most important of all of them is dealing with the Lord on this issue before you have to deal with that other person. Because I know it's true for me. How often have you had a conflict that you know that you need to deal with somebody and you begin praying about it and God actually changes something in you?
For sure.
Before you go and talk to that person. And I think that one, it's healthy to have that perspective, especially when it's coming from the Lord. And two, again, it's like what we were talking about earlier. It's clinging to the humility of I am not perfection. I am not the supreme ruler of dealing with this issue. I am a broken person who needs the guidance of the Holy Spirit in my life to deal with this with you in a loving way.
Yep, absolutely. Let me give you the third thing. Last thing is this, I think, is to see the bigger picture. You got to see the bigger picture. Man, I like to win. We've talked about that before. You like to win. We're both competitive. Sometimes it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it to win. And I think instead, the way that you can deal and lead in conflict is by just losing a battle to win the war, right? Parenting is like a million of these, right? You could choose to try to just basically fight every single battle. You will wear yourself out. You will wear your kids out.
I literally asked you about this, 2 weeks ago? Because it's stuff I'm dealing with as a dad right now.
Like, well, what fights do you pick? And you can't avoid all of them. But man, you don't need to fight all of them either. I think you've got to figure out what does this look like. I think the same thing would be true with employees. I think the same thing is true whenever you're thinking about groups of people or volunteer, whatever it is that you may find yourself in leadership. Okay, is this really worth it? Because a lot of times you get into this kind of defense mode and how do I basically preserve my rights or how do I make sure to deserve this was just wrong? And you're going to be wronged as a leader. Like it is inevitable. You are going to be wrong, especially if you're going to be a godly leader. It's guaranteed. So like get over that part and instead just say, okay, well, what's the bigger picture here? There may feel like they're going to get away with some certain thing, but at the end of the day, I'm trying instead to move the corporation or the business to this level. Or I'm instead trying to move my family in this direction. And so therefore, I'm not going to fight everything. I'm instead, like I would tell you, areas you may say, where do you key in on? How do you know which fights to pick? Areas of culture. How is this going to affect the culture of our organization? How's this going to affect the culture of our family? What are our core values that we're not going to compromise on those things? But man, roll with a lot of other things, right? At the end of the day, if maybe they're expressing themselves or the people around you are thinking about things and acting a little bit differently than you would choose to, it's just a preference. Roll with it. That's fine. But if it's a culture thing, then you want to address it. But also I think areas of truth. We're not going to lie to each other. We're not going to slander each other. We're going to operate honestly and openly. And so if there's some issue that I have to deal with, or basically you think something's untrue, then I'm going to address that. But if it's just, you like this band, I like this band, you like this, restaurant, I like that, or
you like this strategy and this way of doing things, but we're going to do it this way. And, even dealing with more serious things like that. I have a really close friend here that just stepped into a new role within his organization and he inherited a new team and all of those things. This kind of goes back to scheduling and the practical steps there. But he walked into that new team and he immediately put into place scheduled check-ins with every member of that team.
Yeah, that's good.
He makes it a regular part of his rhythm of getting one-on-one time. And what he does in those is he says, these meetings, this is going to be the purpose. If there's anything I need to communicate to you, I'm going to do it in these meetings. But also, he says, I'm also going to use these meetings as an opportunity to coach you. And he said, as long as he's been managing people, he has never had anyone say, you do not have permission to coach me on this or that issue. Because he said it on the front end so that they know that it's for their benefit and for their good, and it is his ultimately job to make those decisions and coach them up in the right way.
Let's be honest, coaching is conflict. That's what it is. But because you say it in a way where your posture and your position and the way that you've approached it in that case that you're talking about there was so proactive and so helpful, that conflict was seen as something that was positive instead of something that is seen as can be avoided. And I
It's
think that's when
empowering
you know
instead of
you've
correcting.
made it. Yeah, it's when you know you've made it. Whenever conflict isn't just something where I just wait to have to tell someone, hey, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But instead, it's a continual, ongoing lifestyle of just saying, hey, I'm in a leadership position. I notice these things, but also want you to know I'm not only going to speak conflict to you.
Yep.
I'm going to speak encouragement. I'm going to do all of this.
Exactly.
And conflict is part of it. So much so, though, it doesn't even, you can't even call it conflict so much. You're just coaching.
And that's
Just
part
being a
of
coach.
seeing the bigger picture.
No question.
So all of our listeners, no matter what role you're in within your company or whatever it may be, maybe your next step should be to establish this kind of meeting where you've got your leadership team or the people that report to you or your coworkers or something like that. And you let them know, one thing I would like to start is by doing a meeting where I can just hear feedback from you, but also I can give you feedback. One, that gives you permission to confront them in a healthy environment. And two, this goes back to everything we've talked about on this podcast from the very beginning. Maybe you should do this at home.
No question.
I mean, there's a reason why regular date nights and regular conversations, and for Emily and I, the sitting in the white chairs in our dining room after the kids go to bed, there's a reason why those things are so important, is because it gives us the opportunity to have some of these conversations in a healthy way instead of a chaotic, PC's going to throw a chair on the basketball court way.
To be clear, I've never done that, just for the record.
Not yet. He has not done that yet.
No, and I retired completely. That was my last year of coaching. So there you go. We're good. So.
That's really good. Let's do this. Let's give three kind of, I suppose, characteristics, words of dealing with conflict. What we know is that what you don't confront, you condone.
Yeah.
So when you are confronting someone, when you're dealing with conflict, I'll start with the first one. You want to be measured.
Yep.
You want to have the foresight to take a step back, to not react, but instead to be calculated and respond.
Yep. Next one I would say would probably be courage. You got to have the courage to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, half the time, half the battle is just making that scheduled time to do it, or actually going there and having the conversation, not talking all around it and whatever else, but actually dealing with the elephant in the room, dealing with whatever the problem is. A lot of the times what I found, it's not so much my verbiage, it's not so much my approach, it's just the courage to actually do it.
Yep. And finally, tell me if you agree with this. I would say you have to be both convictional and humble.
Yep, no question.
If you can balance those two of, yes, sometimes correction needs to happen, sometimes that conflict needs to happen, but if you can do it in a spirit of humility, it makes everybody else better.
Seeing that bigger picture to your coaching, you're not necessarily just always confronting.
Yeah,
Yep.
That's really good.
Good.
Well, thanks so much to all of our listeners to this podcast. Thanks for leaving reviews, and we love hearing from you. It really does mean a ton to us, and what a great encouragement to us. So please keep doing that. Write reviews, rate the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Share it with people that you may work with. Maybe this is a good opportunity for people to share episodes like this with people on their team and kind of help them understand where they're going in the future. And if you want more information, you can go to chriskouba.com. You can find more information about the podcast or reach out to us directly at unitedcity.church/stepup. And we love you. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening to the Step Up Podcast. Do us a favor and like, subscribe, and share this episode to help us get the word out. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment and even leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. For additional information or to reach out directly, please visit chriskouba.com. That's chriskouba.com. You can follow Pastor Chris on social media and just search Chris Kouba, Kouba. You can also follow United City Church on all socials at United City Church. That's UNTD City Church. Thanks so much.